In the last hour, we broke down this remarkable exchange between Senator Rand Paul and Health and Human Services Secretary Becerra with regard to how natural immunity does or does not factor into our federal policy with regard to vaccines and vaccine mandates. And we're seeing it play out in real time here in our area at our local universities. University of Maryland is now facing a lawsuit over their vaccine mandate to employees as well as to the students. And George Mason University had an issue with regard to a professor who was also maintaining that due to natural immunity, this vaccine mandate was unnecessary. And, well, it actually ended up a happy ending for that professor. Let's get the details with his attorney. Jenin Younes is with the New Civil Liberties Alliance, and she joins us now. Counselor, thanks for being here, and congratulations on this victory.
Thank you so much, Larry.
Can you explain the details of this case and how you ended up prevailing with George Mason?
Yeah, so Professor Zwicky approached us and we ended up representing him. He had natural immunity. He had recovered from COVID actually some time ago and had really high antibody levels. So he did not want to get the vaccine. And we argued on the basis of some expert testimony, not testimony, written declarations at that point, that getting the vaccine was not only medically unnecessary, but posed a risk of harm to him. So after we submitted the lawsuit, the university ended up granting him a medical exemption on other grounds. The university still refused to recognize natural immunity, but they didn't want to deal with the lawsuit.
So they settled, but is that a precedent-setting settlement, though? Will other employees or even students be able to say, hey, look, you made this deal over here, now let me in?
Not necessarily, no. He did have another medical reason.
Okay.
I don't know that was, but we didn't get to the place, to the courtroom and to really be able to get at the heart of the natural immunity issue. But I do have another lawsuit pending against the university, Michigan State University, on raising similar arguments.
Jenin, this is Patrice. Question about the Biden vaccine mandates in general. Do you think that they're constitutional or whether they'll hold up? And especially considering so many people who are seeking for religious exemptions seem to be, across the country, seem to be getting denied. So what is your take?
I do not think that these mandates are going to hold up in a court of law. This is a situation in which the government is using a private company to accomplish what it can't, which the Constitution is pretty clear that you can't do that. One part of it he's ordering private companies to impose mandates on companies of 100 people or more. That's completely unconstitutional. And the question of whether he can order federal contractors to require the vaccines is, I would say, similarly questionable. The other aspect of this is the natural immunity issue, which is that all of these mandates fail to recognize natural immunity, which is just completely unscientific and wrong.
Can I ask you a broader question with regard to the legal and constitutional discussion we're having? Before we even get to the courtroom, Jenin, your organization is called the New Civil Liberties Alliance, where you are representing, obviously, people who feel that their civil liberties are being infringed. There's another age-old civil liberties organization in this country, the ACLU. They've actually made the case that vaccine mandates protect people's civil liberties. I mean, in my opinion, they're twisting the understanding of civil liberties into just something that conforms to one political agenda in this town. They used to be nonpartisan, but this is a remarkable turn of events, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I actually remember their op-ed in the Times a few weeks ago. It was just awful. And the argument was something along the lines of, well, requiring people to get the vaccine protects the most vulnerable, so therefore it furthers civil rights. I mean, civil liberties. Civil liberties are about individual rights, and not that. It was very bizarre, twisted logic, and exactly as you said, was just to further a political agenda. They've been completely asleep at the wheel throughout the entire pandemic, frankly.
So how does this play out, do you think, in terms of, as Patrice mentioned, the president's mandate, which is really not the president's mandate? He's calling on a bureaucratic fix here by having OSHA put in a work rule. He made that announcement several weeks ago. We still don't see the language of that rule, so there's really nothing to bring a case out against. Was this performative, where the president makes this announcement and just assumes that companies will adopt the rule without the rule ever having to be written?
I think there's a performative aspect to all of it, actually, having dealt with a number of these universities as well. I know it's not exactly the same thing, but I think a lot of them just want to scare people into getting the vaccine, and they don't really have enforcement mechanisms in place or a plan in place. I think a lot of them were thinking, we're not actually going to have to fire people. Nobody's going to go this far. So I actually agree with you. I think that might be part of what's going on.
Wow. So what's next? What do you see coming down the pike in the next maybe rest of the year and even into early next year?
Well, we have our lawsuit against Michigan State University, which we're waiting a decision on a motion for a preliminary injunction. So we'll see what happens there. I think a lot of these cases raising natural immunity are the strongest claims. I think there are going to be tons and tons of lawsuits all over the country. I expect to see an explosion of federal ones once there is some sort of language. I think this is a fight that's going to continue to go on because for whatever reason, the so-called experts just insist on imposing these mandates on people, even though, regardless of whether or not it's legal, there's a separate issue of whether it's good public health policy, and I think it's not.
Jenin Younes is our guest. She's with New Civil Liberties Alliance, and in our final minute or so remaining, can you draw a distinction here or explain to our listeners? A lot of people are listening, and maybe they don't work for a public entity or a university or a government institution. They work for a private company. They're facing this as well. They have religious objections. I know people who are young pregnant women who feel that these vaccines have not been properly tested or explored, and they do not want to risk anything for that unborn child. Is there a difference between those who work in the private sector and what rights they have versus, as you've fought here, those who work at public institutions?
Yes, there's a big difference because public institutions are subject to constitutional strictures. So we raised arguments in the MSU and the GMU case that you couldn't necessarily raise in a private context. Now, that's not to say that private employees aren't without recourse. First of all, if the private company is acting because of the Biden mandate, then that's an argument that it's acting as it's a sort of a state actor, and so you could sue them on those grounds. And another thing that private companies should keep in mind is that if people suffer injuries from these vaccines, they can be held liable. To my knowledge, the EUA status of some of the vaccines means that the vaccine companies can't be held liable. But if institutions are forcing people to get the vaccines and they get them and are injured, we believe that the companies can be held liable. So they should be careful.
Because they don't have immunity. Pharmaceutical companies do, but the company that forces you under threat of losing your job to get the vaccine, and God forbid you have a health reaction to it, that company is now exposed. Oh,
yes.
Very interesting.
To the best of my knowledge, I believe that that's the case.
Right.
And, as we've said with natural immunity, you're at heightened risk of adverse effects. So these companies should be careful.
Just because an organization out there says has civil liberties in their name doesn't mean they're really looking out for your civil liberties. Jenin Younes, she's with New Civil Liberties Alliance, and I appreciate you joining us. Thank you so much.
Thank you.